The Titanic was a lot more horrifying than you thought, and was far worse than what you learned. But why? First off, you would be sleeping when it hit the iceberg, waking up to a loud bang and shake in the middle of the night, and at first you wouldn't even realize what happened, most people going back to sleep thinking nothing of it. When only 20 minutes later you would start to hear commotion in the halls, being told to go to the top deck immediately, still in your night clothes thinking it was some kind of drill. At this point the crew already knew the ship was going down, but you wouldn't even know it yet, only feeling a very slight tilt in the ship. On the top deck they would try to keep you distracted by playing music while slowly releasing safety boats to prevent panic, where only women and children could escape first. But as time moved on, the tilting grew much worse, where people on the bottom deck would start to see water flowing through the halls and rooms, standing in a large crowd for over an hour waiting to hopefully get a lifeboat. But as the clock neared around 2 a.m., a slow realization would take place that there's not enough safety boats for everyone. At this point, the entire ship would go into a full panic, needing to fight against the crowd to try to get onto the last few boats. Within the panic, the ship would tilt even more, causing the power to go out, which would be pitch black since there was no moonlight on that day. At around 2:18, the tilt would become so extreme it would eventually cause the ship to snap in half, many people flying off or being hit by debris. And if you somehow stayed on the ship, it was now rapidly sinking, where your only choice was to either dive into the pitch black 28 degrees water trying to find a lifeboat, or stay on the ship slowly being lowered into the water, freezing to death. These are 4 animals that have the most brutal start to life after birth. First off, sea turtles. You hatch from an egg and are immediately thrown into chaos, needing to crawl over 100 feet through scorching hot sand trying to get to the water before getting eaten alive. Where seagulls and tons of other predators will attack and eat you before you even have a chance at life, having a 1 in 1,000 odds of survival. Even more brutal, the praying mantis. As soon as you're born, you crawl out of an egg case surrounded by hundreds of other baby mantis, entering a hardening stage, frozen in place, unable to move alongside hundreds of your starving siblings, when suddenly, after an hour of waiting, all of your bodies will be ready at once, putting you in the middle of a free-for-all war, eating each other alive and fighting for food, where only about 10 or 20 will survive. Even worse, the Galapagos marine iguana. As soon as you hatch, you crawl from the ground and realize that you're born on a snake-infested island, where dozens of racer snakes will instantly begin to chase you at full speed just after surfacing, needing to immediately learn how to run and survive over 100 feet to safety, often getting bit and fighting off piles of snakes ambushing you out of nowhere, having a 1 in 20 chance of survival. But worst of all, the wildebeest. You're born directly in the middle of an active herd and are surrounded by predators, where you literally have to learn how to run and stand within only 5 to 10 minutes. And if you can't figure out how to run in that short time period, your life is already over, where you'll usually get trampled and left behind with no protection, being eaten alive by predators. The Pompeii eruption was way more horrifying than you thought, and was far worse than what you learned. But why? First off, you would have 0 warning signs. At the time, the city of Pompeii had no idea they were living next to one of the deadliest volcanoes in the world, thinking it was just a mountain, not realizing pressure was slowly building up inside over the past 700 years that lived there. And on a normal day in 79 AD, you would suddenly feel the ground violently shaking, followed by one of the loudest explosions in history, nearly blowing out your eardrums. Mount Vesuvius has erupted, where smaller towns near the base of the volcano were instantly vaporized and killed by 900-degree gases. But all the way in Pompeii, you wouldn't even realize what's about to happen, looking in the sky, seeing a massive cloud of smoke and ash filling the air. But surprisingly, many didn't run, staying in the city thinking they were at a safe distance, when only 10 minutes later, everything would instantly go pitch black. Ash and smoke traveling hundreds of miles per hour coated the city in seconds. People were immediately blocked inside their homes, literally turning their houses into ovens. In only minutes, buildings collapsed and streets were covered in ash taller than you, making it impossible for you to run away in time. The sound of debris and ash was also extremely loud, like a constant hissing, making it extremely hard for you to communicate in the darkness. Within minutes, hundreds of people already suffocated. But it gets worse. If you still somehow survived, only a few hours later, a wave of superheated gas over 500 degrees swept the city at 100 miles per hour. Even if you were safe inside your home, you would instantly start choking on the air and suffocate from burning hot gas in your lungs. Where in a matter of one day, the entire city of Pompeii and all areas in the region were gone, taking the lives of over 16,000 people. Leopard seals are far deadlier than what you thought, and are way more terrifying than what they seem. But why? First off, they're absolutely massive, over 12 feet long and weigh over 1,300 pounds, equivalent to 2 full-grown grizzly bears. Not only that, their teeth are extremely sharp, specifically made to bite through flesh. But how is this scary? Well, leopard seals are known for being extremely stealthy, doing things like floating near breathing holes or cracks, peeking through motionless. And when a penguin passes through, they'll explode upwards and pull you under. Or sometimes they'll even lurk in the darkness under iceberg edges for hours, quietly waiting without making bubbles until something finally drops in front of them. And if you were to try to outswim them, they can swim up to 23 miles per hour, easily catching up to you no matter how far you got. But it gets worse once they get you. They'll do things like thrashing penguins around in their jaws, skinning them alive with their teeth, making them easier to eat. Or even more brutal, they'll let you escape and swim away as a joke, and then bite you again over and over until you eventually die. Known for killing tens of thousands of animals in its lifetime, making it the second most deadly on the Antarctica food chain. The Black Death was far more disturbing than you thought, and was way closer to killing us than you realize. But how? It all began with a singular merchant ship coming from Asia arriving in Sicily. But something was off. As they docked, you would discover nearly all the sailors on board were either dead or covered in black boils the size of eggs. In a panic, the ship was ordered to leave, but it was already too late. Infected rats, fleas, and sailors left the ship just before, where the disease spread almost instantly within the town of Messina. You would be unknowingly spreading it to everyone around you, where entire neighborhoods and families were slowly starting to get sick. But it was about to get much worse, because only about 2 to 3 weeks later, you would suddenly start to see entire families dying within days of each other, and bodies piling up in the streets. Even doctors and priests treating families started dying as well, resulting in a mass wave of panic. People were covered in black boils, had high fevers, and were vomiting blood. And within a matter of only months, it spread all across southern Europe, causing entire towns to be killed off and abandoned. At one point, the plague even turned airborne, where you could get infected just by being next to someone. Now spreading even more rapidly, sweeping through major cities, and killing off nearly half the population everywhere it touched. But it gets darker. Over 2 years in, Europe was collapsing. Hundreds of thousands of people were dying no matter what city or town you moved to. People tried tons of different practices and cures, but nothing would save you. And in the third year, the plague was killing everything. Millions of people and even animals were dying. Being so deadly, you would die within only 2 to 7 days after infection. And about 4 years in, the populations got so low, it was running out of hosts, finally starting to slow down. But the damage was already done. Nearly 50 to 60% of people in Europe were gone, and millions of more across the world, with a death toll around 50 to 200 million victims. These are the terrifying steps you would face if you got chosen to fight in the Colosseum. First, Roman guards would break down your door and pull you out of your home. If you couldn't pay your debt, were a criminal, or even a slave, you could get chosen at any random moment. Next, they would shackle you up and drag you through the streets, scraping your entire body as they made their way towards the Colosseum. But it gets more brutal. They'll then march around with your body through crowded streets as an example, letting people spit or hit you as they dragged you everywhere. And eventually, you would be taken underneath the Colosseum, pulling you through a dark hallway into a holding cell with nothing in it except a cold floor, forcing you to stay in the cell for multiple days or even weeks as they decided your fate and advertise your upcoming fight. And it was nearly impossible for you to sleep, hearing the crowd chanting all day and people dying directly above your head. Even at night, you would hear wild animals as they kept them in the same room as prisoners. Next, after all this waiting, on a random day, they'll suddenly unlock your door and pull you out. You're now about to discover your fate. If they gave you weapons and armor, you could possibly be a gladiator, fighting other prisoners, having the best chance at survival. But if they handed you a dull wooden sword or a towel, your life was already over, facing the punishment called damnatio ad bestias, being thrown into one final small pitch black cell, hearing the crowd roaring around you, praying to fight something easy. Eventually opening the door in front of you, walking out and seeing a crowd of over 50,000 people cheering for your death. And in a moment of truth, the Roman guards will raise a small platform within the Colosseum, being met with whatever animal you have to face, which they specifically starved and agitated. You could try to fight back, but the best thing you could do is accept your fate. Have you ever wondered why everyone hates the sunfish and often call them the world's most useless animal? What's the reason? Well, first off, they can barely even swim. Unlike most fish, they have something called a clavus, which is basically just a stub instead of a tail fin, making it extremely hard to move around, often causing them to get stuck on the surface of the water and cooking to death from the sun, or aimlessly floating around, unable to turn. But they get weirder. They're entirely defenseless, where predators will attack and take bites of them, but they'll just keep swimming, because their brains are the size of a walnut, and although they can feel pain, they can't really really understand what's happening, simply doing nothing about it. Not only that, but their bodies are bony and rubbery, where predators will usually just bite and spit them out because of how bad they taste. Even fishermen don't bother catching them either, as the only thing that likes eating them is parasites. Sunfish typically have over 40 different species of parasites living on their bodies at once. Being so infested, seagulls will land on them just to eat them off. On top of that, their mouths are permanently open due to their odd bone structure, unable to fully close it, surviving by simply floating around, hoping something drifts into their mouth like plankton or jellyfish. But despite all of this, they've been around for over 45 million years, longer than humans, and outlived many other species, simply by doing nothing.